You know, I mean, it is incredibly tempting to look at a blank sheet of paper and just think you can design the perfect society.
Oh, totally. We all do it.
Right, like you draw up these beautiful, flawless blueprints. Everything makes perfect logical sense. Everyone is happy. Everyone is provided for.
It's a nice thought.
It is. But then you take that paper out into the real world. You actually try to build it, and well, you realize almost immediately that you are building on a swamp.
Yeah. The ground just gives way.
Exactly. The foundation sinks, the walls crack, and that beautiful, pristine blueprint turns into a total nightmare for the people actually living inside it.
Which is pretty much the story of human history, honestly.
It really is. And that tension, that massive gap between a brilliant idea and a catastrophic reality is what we are decoding today. We are exploring a profound dialogue between two thinkers, Nick and Maya, who tackle a question that honestly keeps me up at night.
It's a big one.
Yeah, because history is absolutely packed with dreamers. You know, revolutionaries, architects who promised equality, prosperity, just the perfect system.
Right. And we know how that usually goes.
Exactly. So many of those historical experiments ended in oppression, corruption, or just created entirely new, much worse problems. So as someone listening to this right now, trying to make sense of the world, why should you or I ever trust radical new ideas?
It's a very fair question to ask.
I mean, why not just hold on to what we have, even if we know it's broken, just to avoid making things worse? Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we can fix anything in our own lives or in society, we really have to understand the actual architecture of failure.
Yeah, and to understand that architecture, I think we have to look really closely at Maya's initial skepticism in this conversation, because she represents a very natural, very common human reaction to failure, which is honestly just despair.
Yeah, the feeling of just giving up.
Right. When we look back at the 20th century, or really any century, and we see these grand utopian projects collapsing into authoritarianism or economic ruin, the cynical takeaway is almost unavoidable.
You just assume it's never going to work.
Exactly. We tend to look at the wreckage and just conclude that humans are fundamentally incapable of getting it right. That our nature is, I don't know, too flawed for any system to truly work.
But Nick doesn't buy that, does he?
No, not at all. Nick counters that cynicism with a perspective shift that completely reframes how we should view historical disasters. He argues that concluding progress is impossible just because past attempts failed. Well, it's fundamentally misunderstanding how progress actually happens.
Right, and he brings in this analogy about early aviation, which I loved. It completely shifts the baseline for what failure actually means.
It really does. I mean, think about the pursuit of human flight. If you look at the very early days of aviation, it wasn't the story of immediate soaring success.
Oh, not even close.
No, it was defined by spectacular, often fatal failures. You had machines crashing into fields. You had these designs that looked mathematically brilliant on a blueprint, but they completely disintegrated the moment they caught a crosswind.
So they were essentially building their utopias in the sky.
Right.
And then plummeting straight back down to the swamp.
Exactly that. But the crucial distinction Nick makes is about the reaction to those crashes. When an early plane fell out of the sky, engineers didn't stand around the twisted metal and conclude that human flight was simply an impossible dream.
They didn't just throw their hands up.
No, they didn't view the crash as a philosophical judgment on humanity's place on the ground.
They treated the crash as data.
Yes, exactly. They isolated the specific failure points. Like, was it the wingspan?
Or was the engine just way too heavy?
Right. Or did the materials lack tensile strength? They took the disaster, extracted the mechanical lessons, adjusted the design, and tried again. And that relentless cycle of trial and error is really the fundamental engine of all scientific and engineering progress.
Okay, but I have to push back on Nick's premise here, just a little bit, because I think Maya's skepticism is incredibly valid.
Sure, go for it.
Well, an airplane is a machine. It operates within strict, non-negotiable laws of physics. Gravity, lift, drag, thrust, those forces are mathematically predictable.
That's true.
They do not change based on how the airplane is feeling that day or, who the airplane voted for or what the airplane believes about the afterlife. Societies are made of humans, and humans are messy, unpredictable, highly emotional creatures.
Oh, absolutely.
So how can we honestly compare the process of engineering a machine out of steel and aluminum to engineering a civilization out of people?
It's a very sharp challenge, and it's the exact hurdle that makes societal engineering so incredibly complex. But Nick isn't arguing that societies operate on the rigid laws of aerodynamics.
Okay, so what is he saying then?
What's fascinating here is that he's pointing to the underlying mechanism of adaptation.
Adaptation. Okay.
Yeah. The process of improving a machine and the process of improving a human mind or a human society actually rely on the exact same fundamental principle, which is the feedback loop of correcting mistakes.
Right.
In engineering, you observe a structural failure, you update your physical model, and you build a better wing. In human biology, the process of adaptation is literally hardwired into our brains.
Meaning we are physically built to run that exact same trial and error software.
Precisely. It's not just a metaphor, it's neurobiology. When you make a mistake, when you experience a failure, recognize it, and actively work to correct it, your neural pathways physically alter.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, this is the concept of neuroplasticity. The brain isn't a static object. It rewires itself based on experience and interaction with the environment.
So if adaptation is woven into our biology, if our brains are quite literally designed to learn from the wreckage, it begs a massive follow-up question.
Let's hear it.
Why is humanity so notoriously bad at adapting on a large scale? Like, why do we see societies repeating the exact same historical mistakes over and over?
Yeah, the economic collapses, the unnecessary wars.
Exactly. Authoritarian takeovers. If every single citizen is walking around with a brain built for course correction, why does this keep happening?
To answer that, we have to look at the biological catch to neuroplasticity. Maya and Nick dive into how the brain physically manages this process of reasoning and learning. The seat of our complex decision-making, our critical thinking, and our ability to analyze why something went wrong, that's the prefrontal cortex.
Right, the front part of the brain.
Yeah. So when you encounter a failed system and you sit down to untangle the mess, question your inherited assumptions, and chart a new path, your prefrontal cortex is doing the heavy lifting. And when you do that repeatedly, that region of the brain physically strengthens.
So it kind of functions like a muscle.
It functions exactly like a muscle. Which brings us to the catch. Flexing a muscle requires a tremendous amount of energy.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah, the brain is an absolute energy hog. Actively using the prefrontal cortex to analyze a failure and construct a novel solution is metabolically expensive. It burns a vast amount of your body's resources.
And our bodies don't like to waste energy.
Right. From an evolutionary standpoint, your brain's primary directive isn't to help you design a flawless utopian society. Its primary directive is to keep you alive. And to keep you alive, its default mode is to conserve energy at all costs.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because thinking about this metabolic cost, it completely explains a dynamic we all experience every single day.
Oh, definitely.
It's the friction of doing something new. Like, imagine it's a Tuesday night, you're exhausted, and you decide you want to cook a complicated, brand new recipe.
That sounds like a terrible idea on a Tuesday.
It really does, because you have to gather unfamiliar ingredients, measure everything precisely, time the different components. That entire process is heavily taxing your prefrontal cortex.
It demands intense focus.
Right. It is metabolically exhausting.
Mm-hmm.
But if you just grab your phone and hit reorder on the same pad that you've eaten 50 times...
You don't even have to look at the screen.
Exactly. That action takes zero cognitive effort.
And that is your basal ganglia taking over. The basal ganglia is essentially the habit center of the brain.
The autopilot.
Okay, the autopilot. Yeah, it takes familiar patterns, routines, and known paths, and runs them in the background, specifically so your prefrontal cortex can power down and save energy. Your brain actively rewards you for taking the known path, even if the new recipe would have been infinitely healthier or more satisfying.
So when we scale that up to the societal level, Nick and Maya are suggesting that people don't resist societal change because they are inherently malicious.
No, not at all.
Or stupid, or just unnecessarily stubborn. They resist massive change because the human brain is literally wired to feel safer on a flawed but familiar path.
It really is.
The broken system is the takeout we've ordered 50 times. It might be terrible for us, but doesn't cost any metabolic energy to navigate.
Exactly. It is a brilliant survival mechanism for a hunter-gatherer trying not to starve, but it becomes a catastrophic vulnerability in a complex, modern civilization.
Because the world is so much more complicated now.
Right. The brain consistently prioritizes the familiar over the optimal. When you multiply that desire for energy-saving autopilot by millions of citizens trying to navigate political or economic systems, you start to see the architecture of societal collapse.
We cling to the broken blueprint.
Yeah, because throwing it out and starting over requires a collective cognitive effort that our biology actively fights against.
Man, that perfectly sets up this incredible analogy Nick uses about the sea captain. He says, imagine a captain sailing a massive ship through incredibly dangerous, uncharted waters.
Right.
The captain obviously uses a map to navigate. The map is a vital, necessary tool to understand reality and get the crew safely to their destination. But a truly great captain never worships the map.
Because the map is merely a representation of the ocean. It is not the ocean itself.
Yes, exactly. If the captain is staring at a piece of parchment that says there is open water ahead, but looks out the window and sees a jagged coral reef well, the captain doesn't crash the ship just to prove the map was right.
You would hope not.
Right, but societies have this terrifying, recurring tendency to turn their maps into sacred doctrines. And when we talk about maps in a societal context, we're talking about our grand organizing principles, right?
Yeah, economic structures, political ideologies.
Social norms, religious institutions, all of it.
And Nick and Maya are very careful to apply this universally because it truly does not matter what specific coordinates are on your map.
Right. It's not a left or right thing.
Not at all. It could be a rigidly left-wing political ideology, a fiercely right-wing economic theory, or an orthodox religious framework. The historical danger isn't localized to one specific set of beliefs.
So what is the actual danger then?
The danger is what happens when any map becomes unquestionable. History proves time and time again that when a system concentrates power, demands blind obedience, and eliminates accountability, oppression is the inevitable result.
Because the map becomes more important than the people.
Exactly. It happens when people become more attached to preserving the system itself than they are to the actual human beings the system was originally designed to protect.
Because what is sacred cannot be revised.
Mm-hmm.
If you declare the map is a flawless sacred document, you lose the ability to erase a line and draw a new one.
You're stuck.
You strip away the entire mechanism of adaptation we just talked about. You are barreling toward that coral reef, but nobody is allowed to touch the steering wheel because the blueprint says the water is clear.
And when we look at how the brain processes that kind of sacred dogma, the neuroscience becomes genuinely chilling.
Oh yeah, this part blew my mind.
Right. So Maya and Nick bring in a specific region of the brain called the anterior cingulate cortex, or the ACC.
The ACC, okay.
Yeah, you can visualize the ACC as your brain's internal error and conflict detector. It is the neurological alarm bell that starts ringing the moment reality stops matching your expectations.
So it's the physical mechanism that causes that sinking feeling in your stomach when you look out the window and see the reef that isn't on the parchment.
Precisely. It signals cognitive dissonance. It forces your prefrontal cortex to wake up, burn some energy, and figure out why the world isn't matching the plan.
Makes sense.
But here is the terrifying vulnerability of the human mind. When a belief system claims to have absolute answers, and when an individual or a society fully surrenders to absolute certainty, that anterior cingulate cortex literally powers down. It stops firing.
Wait, it physically stops detecting errors?
Yes.
That is, I mean, wow.
I know. When certainty takes over, the brain realizes it doesn't need to spend energy scanning for discrepancies anymore because the dogma has already provided every answer.
So certainty essentially assassinates curiosity.
At a structural neurological level, yes. If you believe the map is flawless, your brain turns off the alarm bell, and you will sail your ship right into the rocks with a smile on your face, entirely convinced you are still in open water.
That is just staggering. It really forces a moment of brutal self-reflection. I want to pose this directly to you, listening right now. How do we recognize when our own personal maps have become sacred?
It's hard to do.
It is. How do you know when your own anterior cingulate cortex has powered down? Because the trick of it is, nobody ever thinks they are the one blindly following dogma.
No, of course not.
Every single person on Earth thinks their specific map is just a perfectly accurate drawing of reality.
Which is why Nick and Maya take the conversation into its next logical phase. If we want to stand any chance of identifying our own sacred maps, we have to investigate how we acquired them in the first place.
Right. Where did the map come from?
Because the uncomfortable truth is that very few of us ever sat down with a blank piece of paper and deliberately, rationally drew our own maps of reality.
We didn't draw them. They were handed to us.
Yep.
And this brings up the house analogy, which I think is probably the most relatable concept in their entire dialogue. They compare inheriting a societal worldview to inheriting a fully built house without ever inspecting the foundation.
It's a brilliant conceptualization of how ideology transfers across generations.
Think about it. You are born and you essentially move into this massive societal house. It has walls, a roof, a specific layout. You just start living in it.
You don't question it.
No, You arrange your furniture, you pick out some curtains, you make it feel like yours. But you never grab a flashlight, crawl down into the dark, and check the concrete under the floorboards.
Why would you? The house seems fine.
Exactly. It isn't until years or decades later when a massive crack suddenly splits the drywall or the living room floor starts to sag that you realize the foundation is actually sinking into the swamp.
Yeah.
And Nick and Maya point out that this is exactly how we absorb the fundamental rules of society.
Because long before a child's prefrontal cortex is mature enough to engage in critical analysis, their subconscious mind is acting like a sponge.
Just soaking everything up.
Right. We absorb implicit assumptions about what a normal workday should look like. We absorb the definition of wealth and whether it equates to moral virtue.
Right, the rules of government, gender norms, all of it.
Exactly. The metrics of what constitutes a successful life. We soak up the ambient environment we were born into without any filter whatsoever.
So by the time you are 25 years old, and you finally have the cognitive equipment to reason and debate, the entire framework of the house is already installed.
It's already there.
The operating system is already running in the background, dictating your choices.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this subconscious inheritance is the ultimate historical trap. We end up viewing the entire world through lenses that we never explicitly chose to wear.
Right.
And when an entire generation operates this way, they blindly perpetuate deeply flawed systems. They spend all their political and social energy repairing the superficial cracks in the drywall.
Endlessly arguing about the curtains.
Yes, arguing about the curtains without ever once addressing the sinking foundation. Because questioning the foundation requires waking up that dormant anterior cingulate cortex, overriding the basal ganglia's autopilot, and spending a massive, uncomfortable amount of metabolic energy to ask, what if everything I was taught is wrong?
Okay, but let me play devil's advocate here, kind of echoing Maya's very real concern in this dialogue.
Sure, what does she say?
Well, if everyone listening to this right now realizes they are living in an inherited house, grabs the sledgehammer, and starts aggressively digging up the foundation, won't the whole structure just collapse on top of us?
Ah, the fear of chaos.
Yeah. Doesn't constant, relentless questioning of our institutions just lead to dangerous societal instability? If nothing is sacred, if every map is suddenly up for debate, aren't we just inviting total disaster?
It's a crucial distinction, and Nick addresses this directly by separating the concept of destruction from the concept of improvement.
Okay, how so?
Questioning the foundation doesn't mean you want the house to fall down.
So it's the difference between a demolition crew and a structural engineer.
Exactly. Look at professionals whose entire mandate is to question the status quo of their field.
Like doctors.
Yes, doctors and medical researchers constantly question established treatments and pharmaceutical protocols. They don't do that because they want to destroy the concept of medicine.
Right, they do it to save lives.
They do it because they want to improve patient outcomes and stop hurting people with outdated practices. Aerospace engineers relentlessly question their own structural designs, looking for microscopic flaws. Not because they want to ground all flights forever, but to increase safety margins.
Scientists trying to disprove their own theories, too.
Exactly, to deepen our fundamental understanding of physics. In every single one of these disciplines, progress is entirely dependent on ruthless questioning, not blind acceptance of the inherited map.
So the questioning isn't an act of sabotage against society, it is an act of vital maintenance.
Yes. When our anterior cingulate cortex, that internal error detector, actually activates because we encounter a reality that contradicts our map, we face a fundamental fork in the road.
Option A and option B.
Right. Option A, we reject the new information, rationalize away the sinking floorboards, and retreat into the cozy, low-energy comfort of our basal ganglia autopilot.
The pad thai option.
The pad thai option, or option B. We accept that our map is flawed, and we do the heavy lifting to update our mental models. Now, updating those models is incredibly uncomfortable. It causes friction with our peers, it threatens our sense of identity, and it exhausts our brains.
It's hard work.
But Nick and Maya arrive at a profound consensus here. Discomfort is not the same as danger.
Discomfort is not the same as danger.
Wow.
So what does this all mean for us, the people actually trying to navigate this mess?
Bringing it back down to earth.
We started today by looking at the graveyard of failed historical utopias, these grand, beautiful blueprints that crashed and burned in the swamp. But the takeaway from this dialogue isn't that we should stop dreaming or stop planning.
Not at all.
The lesson isn't to surrender to a broken system just because it's the house we inherited. It means humanity must never, ever stop the rigorous, exhausting work of improving the institutions it creates. Every single system, every economic map, every political foundation was drawn by flawed human beings. And precisely because humans created them, humans inherently possess the power to fix them, to update them, and to redesign them when they fail.
Which brings us to the ultimate thesis of Nick and Maya's entire exploration. They realize that history's greatest lesson is almost universally misunderstood. The takeaway isn't that radical change always results in catastrophe.
The airplane didn't prove flight was impossible.
Exactly. The real lesson, the one written in the ruins of every collapsed empire and failed society, is that refusing to change is what guarantees the catastrophe.
Yeah, no.
Refusing to update our societal operating systems when the errors become undeniable just because we are too tired or too comfortable to turn off the autopilot that is the only surefire path to collapse. We are biologically wired with the neuroplasticity to learn from our failures, but we have to possess the courage to actually spend the energy required to do it.
Which brings us entirely back to you, listening right now. We've gone deep into the neuroscience of energy conservation, the history of aviation, the maps, the sinking foundations. But understanding all of this is only useful if you actively apply it.
That's the real test.
So think critically about the maps you are using today to navigate your life. Think about your career trajectory, the dynamics of your relationships, your deeply held political worldview, your personal definition of what it means to be successful.
Really question them.
Yeah. Who actually drew those maps? Did you consciously draw them yourself, or were they handed to you when you were too young to question them? Are those maps still serving a purpose, keeping your ship off the rocks? Or have they calcified into unquestionable dogma that you are just following on autopilot because it's easy?
And as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final provocation to really mull over.
Let's hear it.
Nick and Maya end their dialogue by wondering what the next generation will say about the maps we inevitably hand down to them. But let's bring that timeline much closer to home. If we know, as a biological fact, that our brains are actively wired to hide structural flaws in our reality just to save a few calories of metabolic energy, what if the most vital, and yes, the most exhausting thing you can do tomorrow is to actively hunt for just one single autopilot belief you hold?
Just one.
Just one. Find one thing in your life you are absolutely 100% certain of,
Okay.
and then deliberately, intentionally spend the mental energy to try and dismantle it. See if the foundation actually holds up to the light.
Because if you don't inspect the foundation yourself, you might just be building your perfect blueprint on a swamp. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us today. Keep questioning the map, and we'll see you next time.